Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we are talking about work authorization in Canada. And if you're an employer, HR leader, or hiring manager, you've probably noticed this become a lot bigger of a conversation over the last couple of years and also recently. So today I'm joined by Catherine Tremblay, the co-founder of Altis, and we're going to unpack what's changing, why it's changing, and most importantly, what employers should be thinking about. So let's start there. Why are we having this conversation now?
Morgan, there is so much changing in this area. I was recently sitting with a group of talent acquisition and HR specialists at a conference, and every person at the table was saying a different way that they were handling work permits in terms of the questions they were asking, what they knew about the subject. And I really felt like myself that I was fascinated by it. And I did a deep dive, spoke with clients, immigration lawyers, employment lawyers, and tried to kind of collect everyone's opinions. And I tried to make today's content as riveting as possible. I'm not sure I made it as fascinating as I wanted to, but I thought it was important to bring the subject to the table so we could all be on the same page.
But this isn't just about what you've been hearing from clients, it's also about our story firsthand.
Yeah, that's where the problem started, Morgan, for me, is that we had hired these incredible, talented people. We respect newcomers so much, and we were wanting to be part of the integration process.
Mhm.
And we had these three incredible team members who all of a sudden in December, all three within a very short period of time, permanent workers, one in IT, one in contract success, and one accounting, just suddenly their maintained status were terminated and they were asked to leave the country. And it was really hard on us. And we didn't have the work continuity planned around that. And I felt it was important that we talk a little bit more about why it's happening and how we can be more successful as employers to navigate this better.
So what do the numbers here actually look like?
Well, to put in perspective, as of July 2025, Canada had approximately 3 million non-permanent residents. And that represents about 7% of the population, even as high as 7.6%. The federal government's stated objective is to bring that number below 5% by the end of 2027. And this is part of the 2026-2028 Immigration Levels Plan, which they have set out. And it's very deliberate, and it's about reducing the flow of temporary residents. And the target is 385,000 new temporary resident arrivals in 2026, dropping to 370,000 in 2027, and then again in 2028. So up the 2027 target, 220,000 are workers and 150,000 are international students. So that's how the division is. And so yes, we're all feeling the pinch. And many people, it isn't just about a permit. We know that people come to Canada, they build a life here, jobs, friends, community, and there's a much more human side to this whole experience for both the employer and the employee, but really think about the employee and what their experience might be.
So I think I'm going to ask the obvious question, but I have to. Why is Canada doing this? What's behind all these restrictions now?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of reasons stated, but we'll start with the big one, which is housing. That was the first one on
Mhm.
everybody's mind. And it's, already we had a housing shortage. And then we experienced very rapid population rise or growth. And then more people were competing for limited housing. It put pressure on rents and prices. And so the government originally announced its reduction in immigration targets, and it estimated that the changes would reduce Canada's housing supply gap by 670,000 units by 2027. Now, the second thing is just think public services. We're thinking when the population grows fast, you have hospitals, doctors, nurses, teachers, classrooms, integration and settlement specialists, transit systems, language programs. Nothing could quite keep up with the speed, right? You can't just suddenly order 500 family doctors on Amazon like you would, Morgan.
I
I'm just
wish.
joking. You do by Tuesday, right? So there's definitely that issue. And then there's program integrity. And when the program expanded really quickly, the government needed to make sure that it was being done in such a way that was thoughtful, fair, legal, and all of those things. And so there was a real increased scrutiny on international students. You saw that probably recently where educational institutions and immigration representatives were possibly found to have invited students with fraudulent letters. This was not necessarily the students' fault, but it did land in a problem for the government.
Okay, so if you consider the housing, the settlement services, and the education, and the medical, is the message that immigration isn't as important anymore?
Oh, no, at all. Okay, immigration is extremely important. In fact, it represented 100% of Canada's labor force growth. And as you
Mm.
know, Morgan, our population is aging. I want to call attention to the stat. Canada's worker to retiree ratio is projected to move from 7 workers to 1 retiree 50 years ago. Okay, 7 to 1.
Mhm.
And it's going roughly to 2 to 1. Sorry, I can't even do 2. 2 to 1
That's
by
shocking.
2035,
Yeah.
right?
Wow.
So 2 people working to every 1 retired worker is somewhat problematic. So yes, there are generally shortages in healthcare, shortages in skilled trades. They never talk about the work we do, but there's also shortages in very specialized people in finance, cyber, various ranges of IT, and we really do need specialized skills. So the question isn't, do we need foreign workers? That's not the
Mm.
question. The question is more about, where do we need them, like by geography, in what occupations, in what regions, for how long? And those are the real questions we have to be asking. So that's why we're seeing immigration policy being tied much more closely to occupations and industries, and where there's a demonstrated labor shortage. So in fact, while the government is reducing overall temporary resident arrivals, economic immigration remains the largest component of permanent immigration. So I want you to just put your mind to economic immigration. That's the kind of language that you'll be hearing. So by 2027, it's targeted to represent 64% of permanent resident admissions. So finally, the last piece is about sustainability. And so the conversation has shifted from how many people does Canada actually need to how many people can we successfully welcome, where do we need them, and how quickly can our communities realistically grow, and all the things we talked about earlier, housing and all of those pieces. And finally, regardless of your personal views on immigration, we absolutely know that we need fair and clear rules. And while everything has kind of shifted and changed, we all want to be part of this kind of fairness into the future.
And Canada isn't the only country having this conversation.
No, not at all. All of us, right? We're reading the papers.
Mhm.
Australia, United Kingdom, New Zealand, Australia, the UK, the United States. You see it
Germany.
every day. Germany, yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
So many of these countries are bringing major reform, and it is part of a broader kind of international almost movement towards oversight, towards verification, towards a little bit more restriction, and really allowing the country for greater workforce planning. So we're definitely seeing it across the country, across the world.
Okay, so you've mentioned scrutiny a few times. Why do you think that's been such a big part of the conversation?
Because temporary resident programs grew so quickly, it brought a lot of attention to how they were being operated. We know that there was that whole fraudulent case where um, there were found to be 2,000 letters of offer to come into the country that were fraudulent. And the people that accepted those letters were also part of the problem. I mean, they didn't even know about it, so they were victims themselves, right? But the
Mhm.
problem being that the government saw that occur, and so they had to kind of step in and correct that. And so they created a new Bill C-12. So our clients will hear about that, and it's called the Strengthening Canada's Immigration System and Borders Act. I have to read it because who speaks like that? Strengthening Canada's Immigration System and Borders Act, and it received royal assent in March 2026. So it's now a law, and it introduces more measures to strengthen what an officer can do to basically look at the integrity of asylum seekers and immigration. And so it's not that we don't want to get buried in politics or legislation today, but what matters is that the government is looking more at verification and compliance and accountability and all of those pieces, both on the applicant side and the employer side.
Okay, so let's bring it back to employers. Is work authorization becoming more than just a recruitment and onboarding issue?
Absolutely. And this is probably one of the biggest things I want employers to take away today. Work authorization isn't something we can think about only at the hiring stage anymore. It's becoming
Mhm.
much more about workforce planning. So imagine this, you found a great candidate. They accept the permanent position. The hiring manager's excited. The equipment's been ordered, payroll set up, you know the drill. And maybe the welcome announcement, Morgan, was already sent out. Everybody's excited. And then somebody realizes that the person's work permit expires in 8 weeks. So the permit is actually, maybe they realized the permit actually was tied to an employer, or it had a healthcare restriction, or it's not that anybody did anything wrong, but the actual ability for that person to come into the job and do it for the period of time is restricted. And so I want to be really clear here. It isn't about someone's nationality, or their race, ethnicity, where they were born, nothing like that. It's about whether that person is legally authorized to perform the work that you are offering, right? So
Hmm.
whether there are conditions attached to that authorization that could affect the employment relationship now or into the future.
So going back a second, I think that's where a lot of employers hesitate. They need to know that someone can do the work and that they're authorized to do it, but they don't want to ask something that they shouldn't. So what should they be asking?
Mm, such a good question. And that's actually the crux of a lot of this work is that historically, many organizations, including a very good client of ours that we really respect, they only ask, are you legally entitled to work in Canada? And most of us as employers, it's all we ask, right? But the,
Hmm.
the problem is that it's a little bit broader than that. So
Hmm.
we're seeing that some people are moving to, are you legally entitled to work in Canada without the need for sponsorship now or in the future? But when we spoke with Immigration Council, they pointed out that these questions don't always give employers all of the information that they need to make a good decision. Because someone on maintained status, for example, may be they could legitimately answer yes, while RCC is considering their application. So yes, they're legally entitled to work, but there is a limitation because they're in maintained status. So a more useful question might be, are you legally authorized to work in Canada in this position? The employer could add in this job, location, hours, industry, expected duration, and are there any conditions or expiry dates associated with your work authorization that could affect your employment? And it's an important difference because we're focusing on the authorization required to perform the job that you are staffing, not on where someone was born. So,
Hmm.
a very important reminder is that we should always ask the appropriate question consistently to all candidates. So it's not like you look at the person's name or you listen to their accent, you decide, oh, you know what, I'm going to ask you these questions. No, everybody gets the exact same questions for fairness and for equitability.
So you mentioned maintained status, which some people might remember it as implied status. What is maintained status and why should that matter to employers?
Well, maintain status is actually quite unique, Morgan, because yes, you're right, it was called implied status, and it's one of the areas that causes the most confusion to all employers. So IRCC now called it maintain status, and frankly, I think this is a better name. I think we both agree because nothing is implied. So if someone applies properly before their permit expires and meets the requirements, the law can actually maintain their existing status while IRCC makes a decision. And the important word there is maintained. It's not upgraded, it's not renewed, and definitely it's not guaranteed. It maintains what they were already authorized to do while the decision is pending. So employers shouldn't stop at, are you on maintained status? We need instead to understand what authorization did you have before? What application is pending and when was it submitted? And
Mhm.
under what conditions are you currently permitted to work? Because maintained status tells us a decision is pending, but it doesn't tell us what decision could possibly happen, right? What the decision will be.
And there's a travel issue with maintained status too, right? That's probably one that employers might not think immediately about.
I don't think most of us think about it. It's that someone on a maintained status, if they decide, let's say, okay, I'm going to go on a lovely international trip, IRCC says that they will lose their ability to work in Canada when they return. So if they can't resume their job while their permit application is in decision making, that is a bit of a problem for the manager or the person who like suddenly, Monday morning, that person can't come
Right.
back to work because they flew internationally. So yeah, it's something to pay attention to.
And then are employers facing more scrutiny as well?
Yeah, we are seeing a lot of numbers here, pretty striking numbers actually between April 1st, 2025 and March 31st, 2026. The temporary foreign worker program finalized 1,488 employer compliance inspections. That was quite a lot. 12% of
Mm.
those employers inspected were found not compliant, and more than $10.2 million in penalties were issued. 30 employers were banned from participating in the program going forward. So
Wow.
those inspections, yeah, can examine whether the employee is actually doing the authorized work that you hired them for, whether the wages and working conditions match what was approved, whether appropriate documentation has been maintained by the employer, and whether the
Mhm.
employer has met the requirements of the total program. And officers actually have the permission, I don't know if you know this, to actually go speak to employees without an employer present, by themselves. So the message here is that good intentions are not a compliance measure. It's really important for employers to have good documentation, and really good processes so that should an officer send them a notice, you do get a little bit of notice that they're coming, then you're ready for it.
Okay, so you mentioned documentation and process. What are employers doing differently? What are we seeing them put in place?
We're seeing employers strengthen their internal processes. It's really just a lot of strengthening there. So that might mean recording work authorization expiry dates and setting reminders 90 days ahead, 120 days in advance. It might mean keeping appropriate documentation for temporary workers separately and tracking employees in maintained status to make sure that they're still authorized to work. Some of our larger clients ask employees on temporary work permits to provide periodic confirmation from their IRCC portal. So what they're asking them to do is go in, take a screenshot with the date and their name and all the information there so that they can see it and take a screenshot. And I know you might be thinking, well, is a screenshot actually perfect evidence? No, because we know they can be altered. We actually had one recently where someone tried to alter. We saw that it happened, but we had to pick up on it. So it's not perfect, but at least it gives some employers the chance to kind of take a look. Are they still in maintained status? Has it actually been canceled and we didn't know it, or that the decision was made for them to not be renewed? So very important that there be some kind of periodic confirmation. Some of our clients actually are doing this every 2 weeks. Others are every month, but quite frequently for some of them. And I know it's an administrative burden, but it is very important that we know that a person in maintained status is still able to work.
And then what about maybe your work authorization disclosure?
Well, that's something that came up with the immigration lawyer that we spoke with. I thought it was a really good suggestion that we didn't actually have, but we have now. We're adding it to our employment agreements. So they suggested as a best practice that in our employment agreement, we have language that says the employee represents that they are legally authorized to work in Canada, that the employee agrees to notify the employer of a change in circumstance, the employee agrees to provide updated documentation, and failure to maintain legal authorization to work in Canada, that employment will not be continued. What's interesting there is that it puts the onus also on the employee to share in this responsibility.
Right.
So I really, really like that, and it's something we will do immediately. And many clients have affirmed, something like our legal counsel has always told us that all we can ask is, are you legally entitled to work in Canada? We're asking our clients to really take a deeper dive there because things have evolved, and you can respect human rights and still make sure that you are doing workforce planning that allows you to look ahead.
Okay, so let's stay here for a minute because I think that human rights and fair hiring is definitely top of mind for everyone. So, how do employers get that information they need without crossing that line?
Well, nobody wants work authorization to turn into discrimination. And I think the importance here is really separating the two subjects. It's not about race and place of origin and religion and all those other factors. This is strictly about work authorization, really keeping it tight to that's
Mhm.
all we're really asking about is work authorization. And in that context, we're looking for demonstrated proof that the person is allowed to work in Canada. And I think that what we're really doing when we talk about workforce planning is that imagine if I wanted to hire you, Morgan, for a permanent position, but you only had 3 months left on your work permit. It would make sense that I be aware of that for workforce planning. Either I
Right.
realize that you're in maintained status and I need to work with you and through that, or I know that you have 3 months. Or we both agree that you should probably take a 3-month contract and we will hire someone for a permanent position, which generally we consider permanent to be 12 months or greater.
Mhm.
So, it's really separating the possibility of a human rights violation with work authorization and keeping those very separate. And we talked about it earlier, but asking everyone the exact
The
same question
consistency,
is really
every single
important.
person.
Mhm,
Mhm. Okay, so you've
mhm.
talked about a lot about what's happening right now, but if I'm looking forward to 2027, what should I be watching?
Well, it's that nothing is static. This whole space is really changing. It's changing fast. And what I'm seeing is that employers are sharing ideas with each other, and it's really helping all of us to be better. And so, looking at the targeted programs, looking at where there are going to be changes, and just making sure our compliance really is there and that we don't make it such an administrative burden that we can't function, but that we
Mhm.
allow ourselves to have greater compliance to ensure that if an officer says, okay, I'm coming in, we're ready for it.
Okay, now on that administrative burden, we kind of briefly touched on AI, but let's bring it back there. Is there a way that AI could maybe help with this administrative burden?
Well, it makes us think about payroll. Remember the old days, not that you remember the old days, writing checks and,
Yeah.
typing up invoices. I mean, it was very manual. And now, of course, we all have payroll systems and the remittance are taken care of for you and all of that. So, and the T4s and records of employment, all of those things are automated. Well, very similarly, all of us need to ensure that AI/other tools will reduce our administrative burden here. And I don't think we all have the exact answers, but to have a system that would allow us to know as employers, possibly even directly with the government, that someone's work authorization remains valid would be really interesting. And we don't need anything glamorous. We just need to make sure that we're compliant and that the work isn't becoming administratively onerous, but AI will certainly help us there.
Okay, so this is probably a good time to bring it all together because you've covered a lot. If an employer is just going to remember two, three, four things from this conversation, what should they walk away with?
Firstly, they have to re-examine the question they're asking. Are you legally entitled to work in Canada is no longer enough. I think they really need to re-examine that and add a little bit more depth to it.
Mhm.
Secondly is their documentation, which we already talked about. Thirdly is making sure that everyone is trained that human rights and work authorization are distinct from each other. And finally, I would make sure they get their own legal advice because I know you know this, but I went into a slippery slope looking at every single detail and not everybody gave me the same answers. So I think every
Mhm.
person, every company needs to examine their own situation and do their own deep dive to make sure that they're above board.
Right. Okay. Well, I think that's a perfect place to end. Like you said, this isn't about making hiring more difficult. It's about asking better questions earlier, maybe planning ahead and making sure that everyone is asked the most consistent question. Again, this is not legal advice, so please consult your own legal counsel for any immigration questions. But thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Morgan.